quite get used to that. Well, great. Thanks everybody for joining. I'll let other folks in if or when they join. Let me go ahead and present my slides. Great. So welcome to the community conversation. I think all three of the participants here are brand new to the Collective Mind community, I believe. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. My name is Seema Patel. I am a senior advisor at Collective Mind. I'm joined by my colleague, Emily Goodman. So just to kind of kick things off in standard fashion is just to give you a little bit of background on Collective Mind so you have some context. So we are, we're an organization that works with networks and those who work for networks to help them be more effective and impactful in what they do. One side of that is focused on consulting for networks. So we help networks design or redesign their networks. We develop and strengthen the capacity of network teams. We work with networks on their strategies, and we also assess and evaluate networks using some proprietary diagnostic and assessment tools that we've developed. The other side of what we do is supporting network practitioners, such as yourself. And this session is an example of doing that. So we help network practitioners build skills and approaches. We co-create solutions with them. We connect and share ideas and learning opportunities and sort of create the space for you to be able to build a community with other network practitioners. And then we also help you sort of learn the fundamentals of network practice. So we have Networks 101 and Network Management 101. I'll pull up a slide on those things later on. So again, these community conversations are a space that we facilitate and provide, but it's really about providing a space for a co-host such as Shay to really share his network experience, and then to bring you all into that conversation to share yours, to share your reflections on the topic, but to share your experiences based on that topic in your network context. So it's really so that you can take away some practical learnings, but it's also a space for you to sort of be with your people, be with your network folks, and share your own experiences with your network peers. I'm gonna sort of keep it fairly short, but I think some folks have already done this, but it would be great if you could just put your name, network, and location, and maybe just one word or phrase that comes to mind for you when you think about network culture. Sort of like what brought you to this conversation? What sort of piqued your interest? So if you could chat that in the window, it'll give maybe Shay and the rest of us a little bit of context about what's to come. And then as you're doing that, I'll just wanted to talk a little bit about the format. So in about a minute, I'll turn it over to our co-host, and he'll give a brief topical presentation about network culture and creating supportive network culture. Because it's such a small group, what we usually do is break folks out into small groups just to do brief introductions and kind of warm folks up and then bring you back for the conversation. I think we might not end up doing that today, which is totally fine. So we're just gonna jump into a conversation right after the slides. So we can keep it very informal. You know, feel free to unmute yourself and just jump on in whenever you feel comfortable, but let's just make this as casual conversation as we possibly can. It's great to have such a group of, you know, interesting folks as I'm looking at this chat. Yeah, complex, absolutely complex. Yeah, great. It's going to be a small but great conversation. Really appreciate you guys coming. With that, I just wanted to introduce the topic. So we will be talking about creating a supportive network culture. Shay Franklin from Men Engage Europe has kindly joined us to chat about how Men Engage's network culture has evolved based on building strong individual personal relationships and extending that across the network. So I've put up here on the slide how Collective Mind defines, how Collective Mind defines network culture, which is the network's operating philosophy, including shared values, norms, attitudes, and practices of both individuals and groups. So that's just sort of to set the stage and the context for the conversation and help you frame your thoughts on network culture within your context. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and stop presenting my slides. And Shay, I'll kick it over to you. And while you're introducing yourself, I'll pull up your slides as well.
Okay. What to say? I'm Shay Franklin, and as you can see, I recently passed my 70th birthday. So I'm an old white man in Ireland. And that brings a lot of different things together. But I work in Ireland. I work for something called the Men's Development Network, which is an organization that, here comes a slide. Yeah, good. Will you go to present with that? My eyesight is perfect, thank you. So along with that, I'm a co-coordinator for Men Engage Europe. But just quickly a bit about the network in Men's Development Network in Ireland. We work with men across a whole series of different perspectives. We work with perpetrators of male violence against women. We have a men's health operation that works around advocacy and men's health and training. We were signally involved in development of a men's health policy for the Irish nation, and it was the first national men's health policy in the world in 2010, and we're very proud of that. We have a counselling operation and a helpline, and then we're involved in advocacy and activism. The White Ribbon is a program that reaches out to men to seek them to pledge not to be a bystander, not to be a participant in violence against women. Turn Off the Red Light is an advocacy campaign that operated and was successful in changing the Irish law on the purchase of sex to the what we describe as the Nordic model, so that the selling of sexual activity is no longer against the law, but the purchase is. And we also have a parenting program, which is about fatherhood engagement. Thanks. That'll be the next slide. Men Engage Europe is a very disparate network of NGOs and individual actors who work in the field of engaging men and boys with gender equality. We talk about transforming masculinities as the kind of the basis for what we do. What unites us is our fundamental goal of dismantling patriarchal systems through working with men and boys. In other words, that's not, feminism isn't just women's work. It is about working with men and boys to shift their rigid masculinities. As Europeans within that, we acknowledge that we sit in a place from where patriarchy spread across the world over the past few centuries, and where colonization spread across the world, and we look over our shoulder at that. And we're moving through a process of trying to understand exactly how we are. We're very much, we're not all white, but we are very much a white network, and we're conscious of acknowledging that and stepping up about that and being accountable. We work at the margins in the main, and in some places counter the mainstream. We do hold ourselves to be accountable and open to challenge. And this spills into our working lives and our personal lives. And it asks us to be able to sit with change and the discomfort of change. And again, speaking as a 70-year-old white man, this is sometimes not the most comfortable place to be. Thanks. Next slide. So we're a regional network within a global alliance. We have no legal existence in Europe. Our legal relationships happen through one or other of national organizations, in the main MAN, which is an active organization based in Sweden. We have 100 members stretching from Istanbul to Lisbon, from Moscow to Dublin. So it's right across, kind of beyond the boundaries of official Europe, but it encompasses many ethnicities, cultures, and languages. And we have NGO members, and we have individual members as well. And we're careful to, there's a vetting process where an aspiring member signs up to on the MENengage global website to a series of commitments, and then through contacts on the ground within Europe, we have a vetting process which looks at either individuals or NGOs. Most of the individuals are either graduates or postgraduates, and some working as consultants in gender across the globe. Thanks. Next one. The only official document that we have, if you like, is our house rules, and that's about how we are going to relate to each other. It was the first formal that came about in 2018, and that was after about 8 or 9 years of fumbling our way through becoming a real network across Europe. So there's still no legal existence, but all members subscribe to the beliefs, values, and code of conduct of MENengage Global. That's as individuals and also as organizations. So we are and can be held and have been held to account for how we are in the world in terms of the work we do, but also how we are in the world as individuals. Thanks. Yeah, I describe it this way, which is about creating safety and encouraging courage. When you're working, certainly when I'm working outside at the margins with people at the margins, we're asking to create safety for people to step in and encourage them to be courageous. And sometimes that's against the mainstream. I had a conversation with in one of our check-ins with a member from Far Eastern Europe, where the regime in which she lives under is becoming more and more rigid, and she had to say she couldn't speak about issues around LGBTQI because she was in fear about it, because it's the impact that it might have on her organization. So even within a private conversation online, she felt hesitant about doing that. So and while I live in a small democracy, mostly liberal, so I don't have to live with those fears, but I'm conscious of those fears. Similarly, if you look as far as Turkey, where recently they withdrew from the Istanbul Convention around violence against women, again, conversations with people living under those regimes becomes difficult and painful for them, but also for us to accept and acknowledge that there are those difficulties. So really, for me, it's about support and encouraging people and demonstrating practice by stepping in and being real and being present and being accountable. Okay, next one. As well as being accountable, there's the need to be prepared to be challenged, and to do it with care and sensitivity. Be conscious of our privilege. We have a formal commitment to be accountable to women-led feminist organizations, and to include they're involved at a global level, and we are advancing our accountability in Europe to be able to do that more powerfully within Europe. As I say, sorry, just a moment. Because over the past year, we have been the Menengage Global has been running an ongoing symposium. We would have had it in person in Kigali in Rwanda at the end of last year, but because of the changes in the world, it moved online. And for 3 days a week from November until next week, there have been a series of running sessions with huge input from right across the globe. So that has brought certainly me as a European and us as Europeans into contact with expertise and individuals working right across the global south. And that has had a really significant impact on how we see ourselves. Thanks. Next one. Yeah. All of the work for Menengage is done on a voluntary basis. In other words, that I take time out from my work with the network to work for Menengage. So we strive to, because it's on that voluntary basis, we strive to have an open personal relationships and offering care and encouragement to each other. We meet monthly online. So we have a steering committee. We have co-coordinators, of which I'm one of 3. We have a secretariat, which there are 3, and then there are the members. And every time we meet, we set out to say, "And how are you?" In other words, there's a check-in and a listening round for everybody on each of those occasions, and it sets us up to understand how everybody is living within what is going on for them at the moment, and then whatever is fresh in their minds. For members, we offer what we call an open, safe check-in. That's meeting of members, and that's really just giving people a chance to say, it started in March last year with the impact of lockdowns, and it gave people a chance to talk about how it was to live with the changes that were going on in their own lives and in the lives of their work. And it gave us a chance to begin to connect with others and feel, because one of the biggest things that was happening at that stage was isolation, and to feel connected in with people who were doing similar kinds of work. And I spoke earlier about the difficulty of activism for social justice being unwelcome by state actors, and this can be a real issue. And the more isolated people were, and in Eastern Europe, as things have developed, they became more and more rigid over the past year, and people felt more and more fear. So the basic culture, as I would describe it, is this piece, which is about making sure that yes, the work gets done, but that it's a place of care for the members and the people who can come. And I recently, in a conversation from across regions on the globe, in reviewing our conversations about our symposium, and this was the clear piece that came through, that our connection to each other, which was set up, if you like, symposium, and by the regularity of access to it, it gave us support, every individuals from right across the globe support in these kind of safe spaces, which became really, really important. And the next. One. Yeah, our restrictions moved us everything online, and that meant we could get together. We're small organization, small NGOs in the main. We don't have funding, so we get funding and have been able to meet once every 2 years. So, but being able to meet online, having to meet online, has brought us much closer together and allowed us to develop friendships and supportive connections when we needed it. In fact, I said this already. Now that I look at it. Okay, thanks. Next one. Is there one more?
I think that's it.
That's it. Okay. I suppose, I mean, the question I'm left with, is this a common experience in terms of how the restrictions have hit us? One of the things that I've decided is wonderful is that I have these kind of conversations in my own home. I see you coming into my home rather than anything else, and that means that I think I can be braver. I think I can be better connected. My family is just outside, and yeah. So that has been a significant impact. Much as I disliked, we lived with restrictions to travel. We could only travel 5 kilometers from home, other than for something essential, and I became quite content with that. But it was because I was able to reach out across the globe and have conversations. I'm remembering a conversation with a woman in Fiji. One couldn't go any further. We might say in Ireland, if I went any further, I'd be coming back. And those kind of conversations were made possible by COVID. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shay. I have so many thoughts and so many questions, but I'm not going to ask any of them or say anything. I'd like to open it up to the folks on the phone. What was sparked by this for you? Because it seems, by Tiffany's comments, and I'll echo that there's a lot of inspiring content that you talked about, Shane. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting observations from folks. So what comes up for everybody?
I have a couple of questions, but something, Shay, you just said really sparked I want to know more, and would love others' thoughts on it as well. You said being home and near your family allows you to be more brave and more brave and connected, or something along those lines. Wanting to hear a little bit more about how have you experienced that, and if it feels like others might be similar, and this group as a whole, just trying to think about connection around doing really hard, challenging work like you are doing, like I presume many of us are doing, and how being home might help or hamper.
Yeah, that for me, that grew out of a conversation that said, I was sitting with a group of men who live pretty isolated lives anyway, and we came online, and there were some of them missing. And the conversation became, well, it's not the same as when we sit in the circle. And it's not the same when I can look across the room. And my instinct is to say, in that kind of, when I hear all of the negatives, I began to reflect on, well, what actually is becoming better for? And two things popped up. One is that I was sitting in my home place and safe and feeling safe in that home place. And the other was, when I sit in a circle, one person in the circle that I don't see, and that's me. But I sit here with you and I'm looking at it, and I can see my responses, I can see my reactions just as you would normally see them. So it gave me another perspective, and it really drove me to say, well, actually, there are advantages about this. It's not all a deficit. But the big one for me is that I come in here, I sit surrounded by myself and my things, and I am able to drop into whatever is right for me, and to take account of my reactions and responses to what I'm hearing. And especially when I'm out at the edge and doing difficult work, that's a really important place to be, is how that self-reflection, part of my day-to-day care for myself is self-reflection and critically looking at how I am responding to what's going on. So, and this is really important, that I can put my feet on the ground and settle and be aware of how I am. And I do that so much better when I'm here.
I'm gonna share with you guys an article on the chat. Thank you for your inspirations. First, I was like, yes, you know, this kind of meetings are so critical and has to be replicated. I live in Massachusetts, and I trying to see the same efforts where more men are getting together in support of women's rights. And like you say, support the status quo and the breaking the patriarchy. But you know, working from home also, you know, has made me rethink that for the networks, we were able to expand and to have more consistent meetings with some people we wouldn't meet otherwise, you know, in person. So there are a lot of, you know, the pandemic was awful, but there's so many great things to reconsider moving forward, to build networks, and just being closer, you know, especially I work at a national levels with different states. So being able to meet with different people in one place is just great. I know this is like new and different, but it's innovative and transformative. So let me share that article with you, just for your entertainment. It's about what do you keep during Ramon session. So I found that inspiring.
A question that I wanted to throw out that this for Shay for general discussion. I think in your slides, oh, and I can, you know, echoing everything everyone said about you know, really appreciating the substance of the presentation and the orientation of Men Engage Europe. Really seems like a very reflective space and intentional in creating culture. And kind of building from that, I think one of the kind of tenets of the community agreements that you mentioned was something like embracing struggle, or I forget the word that was linked with struggle, but the kind of descriptive way that you address struggle internally. And I was wondering if that relates to how you shape, if that shapes how the group works with conflict, and maybe building from that, like if there's a link between, you know, there's a lot of, in the last few years, especially in spaces that are dealing with, you know, close personal issues like identity and values. There's this idea of calling in versus calling out, and, you know, navigating different conflicts. So this is both for Shay and anyone in the room, you know, how that idea of, again, I don't know if the word was embracing struggle, but just advice that you might have from Men Engage and how you navigate conflict within the network. What are the important kind of building blocks perhaps of the network that allow you to have this what sounds like healthy kind of engagement and responses?
Yeah. How do I answer this? It's okay. Personally, once I accept that I have signed up to be accountable, that means that I must be prepared to hear that challenge and through what is and yeah. And because there is the conversation around, because us as individuals, and we're asked to turn up authentically, for we're seen authentically, and for the challenge is with care and respect, then certainly in a better place to hear it. And that's, if it's acknowledged that, well, maybe I take time to understand what's being said, but that I come back and respond and make amends if that is appropriate, but that all of the conversations are held with respect and care, so that we have a kind of virtuous approach to hearing each other and responding to each other. And
Are you, did he cut off for all of you as well? He did. Oh no. Let's see what I could do.
That what spotty internet will be.
Okay, maybe hold. There we go.
sorry, I dropped out for some reason. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And just and finding the words, finding the language, finding the grammar, to find my own words and to find the courage to say them out. And it is within Men Engaged that I stumbled into that way of being, coming from a place of, I've been sitting in groups of men for 25 years, practicing where we say, and we now call it transforming masculinities, but we used to call it contradicting male gender conditioning. So men of my age, I was born in 1951, were conditioned to be not show emotions. Big boys don't cry. You know, we're conditioned to compete, either on the sport field or elsewhere. In work, we're conditioned to compete. We're conditioned to swallow hurt and vulnerability, to be stoic and silent in our struggle. And possibly the only acceptable to an visible emotion is one of anger. And I've spent 25 years working with men to contradict those things and find ways to show vulnerability, to admit to vulnerability, to not being silent in hurt. And so that gave me a practice which I could then take into the more difficult spaces that I now find myself. I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but those are my thought processes.
Thank you.
Fundamentally, it's about showing up, you know, as who you are and how you are right at that time.
I have a question as well, Shay. I was wondering, how do you encourage, incentivize, or energize the members of the Men Engaged Network to participate in this philosophy? And that's a question both to you for Men Engaged, but I'm wondering about others' experience of this. How was it? What kind of challenges have you come across, and then what have you done, if anything, to encourage people to participate in, for example, the house rules that you spoke about, or about these safe space monthly calls? What does that look like?
Yeah, they came about in March last year, and like we were saying before this meeting started, they have tailed off in terms of, but there are different people are coming and going, and I suspect it's Some of it is, well, I'm in need right now, so I'll come. Because it isn't agendaed or anything else, and there's nobody keeping track of who's there, but it's a significant part of what we have offered, and I suspect something like 50% of members have participated over the past year in those check-ins. And how do we support it? I think we support it by anything that we do has this component of check-in attaching to it, and it's taught by demonstration rather than by teaching. So it's how I am in the session and how others are in the session and how we've learned to be, and I've seen it. All I can say is I've seen it work, and I know it is the process that has been happening for the past 25 years with me, with Sitting in Men, with men. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 sessions for a man to find his feet and find his voice. But my experience is that they do. And I don't think it's any different online with this. And also the people involved in this work are all people who do work at the edge. So therefore they are reflective by but to survive well and care for themselves, they do need to be reflective. So they bring that approach and that attitude and that way of being to Men Engage as well. So there's a synergy or a rub off from one to the other on it.
We have a follow-up question from Tiffany in the chat. If these monthly meetings, are the monthly meetings all about the check-ins?
Yeah, that's all they're about. Sorry, my camera's down. Yeah, and it was deliberate that there wasn't any business. So it was about finding connection and finding support. And it was in one of those that a woman said, well, there's only so much I can say because I am fearful. And, you know, and since then I've seen her country go into danger, as when there were lots of women wearing white and red on the streets of her hometown, you know, and she was in fear for that her husband might be, because he wasn't a native, that he might he might be deported. So, yeah.
I'm curious as, oh, see, go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you. I'm thinking quite a bit about the equity work I do here in the US, and particularly around how do we help the leaders who are most often white men, white women, understand the inequities that are created in like child welfare and child well-being systems. That's, you know, in the US, it's just another form of policing of families globally. There are many similar kind of colonialistic aspects to it. Sometimes I am struggling in this work because it feels so obvious. It feels like these aspects in, you know, in all of the ways in which inequity is built in, patriarchy, racism, all of those concepts, and are just baked into the fabric of every kind of policy, decision, action, interaction. And I'm curious, as from your perspective, as a fellow white person doing this work, how to like take it from a, you know, it's like it's a very much like I feel it in my heart and soul when I see like how we're baking in inequities in each component, but struggle with how to like communicate that to someone who doesn't feel it. Any kind of suggestions around that? Because I'm just like, it's up. Like, why? How do you not see this? Yeah. Any suggestions from your work? And it sounds like you've done some complex work in this arena.
Yeah. Until year 2000, I worked at the center of power, not in this world at all. I worked in advertising and marketing, and I appeared at the boardroom tables of some of the biggest companies in the world and at ministers' offices. And I gloriously burnt out at the age of about 50 and stopped, and then started doing this work because I learned that I needed to recover and I needed to come back to myself, and I did that sitting with men. I then ended up working with men living on the margins, men who are returning from isolation. The core of my work for the past 5 years has been with old men like myself. And I use the word old rather than older because I live as an old man. But those men returning, looking to encourage them to come out of isolation because that's where they were living. And they were isolated by economics or possibly addiction or migration. They were men of my age or older migrated. If you were uneducated, you migrated to the UK and worked in construction. And the thing about construction is it breaks your back, and you come back to Ireland having lost your networks and lost your connections, and maybe your only connection is with a man behind a bar. So those were the men that I was working with, utterly powerless, living with the impact, the similar kinds of impacts that you speak of the system that, the just ignored them or shunted them into atrocious housing. And there I became aware really quickly of what it meant to have no power. And that was to realize the powerlessness where, previously I grew up as a boy in a large family, but it was a professional middle class family. It was haunted by other strange things, chaos within the family, but I was fundamentally middle class. So I had the access, and I knew how to run the system. And if you're powerless, you don't know how to run the system, and
by intention, right? The system designs it so you can't.
Utterly that it becomes circular. And in the past 20 years, the system has moved online like everything else, so that if you're isolated and undigital, you're pushed away further. Your money comes, all of these things. So one of the jobs I did in that work was to coach men how to answer the questions when they're being challenged around their welfare support. So that we had a list of questions, and we would, and certainly that, inarticulacy for somebody. I'm understood to be articulate and sometimes eloquent, so I know how to use words, but realizing that is a skill that not everybody has. I took it for granted. I was essentially a salesman, so that I developed those skills over the years. So not having them and realizing that not having them, and knowing that when one of these men walk into a welfare office, that the way he looks, the way he walks, the way he dresses, everything about him is going to bring the shutters down. So some way of understanding being on the receiving end of power was what I learned 20 years ago. No. And for people of goodwill, and goodwill is never enough, but it's a starting place. To get them to, Robbie Burns is a Scottish poet who said, would that God the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us. So how do you see them, and how are they seen? What happens? I walked into an emergency room with a man that was in terrible state physically, and he had been neglecting himself. But basically, the first things he was asked were not about his hurt or his injuries, it was about his alcohol consumption, because he was being blamed for bringing this on himself. You know, that, you know, so that getting into that space of being with and understanding the lives of how it is for a young single mother to walk in and be pilloried and blamed for her situation and for, you know, not taking care of her child. I'm speculating now, it's outside my experience, but those are that's, and, you know, layer in on top of that color and race and culture, and, you know, I don't know whether I'm answering them, you know, but
Thank you.
Now, as you were talking, Shane, and sort of as I'm seeing Sheila's reaction and sort of understanding that the topical aspects of your network work are so complex and sensitive and multi-layered, I'm wondering about how others have experienced, well, what others' experiences have been in trying to set up a set of shared values when you are working in topics that are so entrenched in these sensitivities, that are so complex. You're already dealing with something that's very, very complex by the nature of your work. But when you have a network and you have such a diverse set of stakeholders at the table, what experiences have you all had in trying to bring folks together around a set of shared values, given those dynamics?
I probably don't have the most, this is not even advice, this is an experience, but that I think has been really informative around setting, how do you set shared values in a diverse group in particular. So thinking about, like, kind of prior to my work now, worked in a fellowship model of cohorts. And as the organization grew, I was in one of the cohorts and then joined the team. As the organization grew, the cohorts became more and more diverse. And when I say that, I mean by race, by sexuality, by class, by lived experience with systems, and so on and so forth. And that in the earlier stages, when the groups were far more homogeneous, that, like, coming up with shared values was like, bloop, yep, okay, great. Here's our list. We all understand these things, at least in somewhat of a similar fashion, and have similar lived experiences, world, experiences. It's just a simpler process. And as the group evolved to be far more diverse, words are meaning very different things to folks who very different backgrounds. And I'm thinking about, for example, in one of the last ones, a white gentleman saying, like, let's create a safe space. And then a woman of color sharing, like, no, I'm in America as a woman of color. There is no safe space. Like, and so think just, and really it took months, like in the more homogeneous group, it took like a couple of hours. In a group that far more diverse, that has the innovation and the creativity of these diverse experiences, that's incredibly valuable. That process took months. So that's my only thoughts and whatnot. And it just transformed my mind to thinking, like, this is not a simple, setting shared values is not a simple process. And to do it well, means time and depth of understanding each other's perspectives around what words and terminology and kind of sentiments mean.
I think one of the examples of values and different values can be, I can speak from experience, and actually I have run for office. I've run for a state representative, and I was on a school board. And so, you know, you need to build constituency, and you need to make sure that your values, you always are true to yourself and what you promote. And when you're building that constituency, like you're sort of coming with transparency. So I think like organizational, you know, either you have your mission statement, you always come back to the core. You need that to grapple into your own values. But I think like running for office is the most fascinating part, where you really are building sets of different constituencies and really try to have support. So, you know, of course, I lean progressive democratic about what I do. And actually have many people who were in the Republican Party per se, who we have great conversations, we have great learnings, and you know, we have the, you know, the foundation that we just listen to each other with respect, that we may agree to disagree in many things, but we listen to each other perspective and see for areas of growth. So I think that, you know, we can take these analogous experiences from, you know, running for office and representing and still being true to yourself and your values. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it sounds like especially there's a need to be very upfront and transparent about those sort of set of values upfront, and sort of making sure that you're as communicative as possible so people know what they're coming into right from the outset. So yeah, absolutely makes sense.
You know, in my experience, I've found that even in the most diverse groups, that we can find common ground. That, like you say, no, you know, that we would say, well, no man's issue is greater than any other man's issue, so that everybody, and at times we just share time, and that, you know, the invention of the iPhone meant we could literally share time. We'd be here from 8 to 10. That's 120 minutes. There are 12 of us. That's 10 minutes each. And no, time out. Also listening, and in particular, challenging with respect and care, so that I'm speaking not, I'm speaking about my content rather than my feeling about my content. If I have something to say to somebody else, so that I step aside, I'm not speaking out of anger or something else, so that I can be heard. And so that those kind of simple things. So there was a group of very, very marginalized men moving from addiction into connection, and there were young fathers, and the only way we could sit together was that before every session we said, what will it take for you to feel brave here today? You know, and we stopped saying safe space. We started using brave spaces, because, and it was a Black New Yorker gay man who said, I don't use that anymore. I will never forget him. He looked me in the eye and says, there is no safe space. I look for brave spaces, and I just loved it so much. It was just because it is really what we need safety for, to be courageous. Well, yeah.
I wish we could stay on for another hour. This is such a great conversation. Yeah, maybe we could have a part 2, Shay. Maybe after people come back from breaks and vacation, but I know it's the end of time. Thank you so much for everybody joining. John, I'm sorry that you missed the session, but I'll post the recording, and I'm going to write a summary blog of what we conversed about today, so I can share that as well.
If
No
I may,
problem.
it's part of my practice that we check out as well as check in. And I'd really love to hear a word from you as to how it is as we finish. I know we're just really excited and having been challenged, but absolutely delighted to have come. I would like to hear a word from each of you, if I may.
I'd like that practice.
The first word that comes to mind for me is encouraged.
Inspire, again, re-inspire.
Brave is the word that stuck out to me, that last point that you brought up.
Safety and encouraging courage. Creating safety and encouraging courage.
Thank you.
Yeah, John, we won't put you on the spot, but thank you all so much for joining. I won't pull up the slide with our events, but do check out our website. We've got a virtual summer camp that's coming up. It's a 3-week training, though you can choose 2 weeks, and it's all about networks, network management, and peer learning and shared support. So we would love for any or all of you to participate, and just email me. You have my email address if you have any questions. And Shay, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, we hope to stay engaged with you.
Hope so. Bye now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.